Accession number 33904, reel 1.
The Britannic, fitted out brand new as a hospital ship, had left Southampton with Pilot Jessop on board, going out to the Mediterranean.
Well, you see, I was down nursing.
Yes.
You don't believe it.
We just had a brief interruption on this tape while Miss Jessop showed me a photograph of herself as a striking, dark-haired, dark-eyed Irish lass in a nurse's uniform about to join the Britannic. Now, she had hoped when the ship went out to the Mediterranean as a hospital ship that she would be able to meet her brother, who had been in Salonika for 2 years, and unfortunately he went to Malta and the Britannic had too deep a draft to get into Malta, so she went to Murdros and was on her way there.
Yes, we were supposed to get there that afternoon.
And thankfully there were no wounded men on board the ship. It just had the crew and the medical staff on board. And one of the nursing sisters had been ill and was downstairs in the cabin. Jessop had gone down to spoil her, as I'm sure she did most of the people whom she took care of, and trying to get her to eat some lunch, just as she's been trying to get me to eat lunch for the last 2 hours. Anyway, tell us what happened then, if you would.
Well, the thing was, she had been struck. I didn't mention that, did I?
You said there was a noise and you felt it was a torpedo.
Well, I was upstairs in the pantry getting this nurse her breakfast, and all the staff, medical staff, dozens of doctors, you see,
right,
and nurses, they were all in the saloon at breakfast.
Right.
When suddenly, crash.
Right.
Well, no sooner did the crash happen than everybody stood up from their table and disappeared. And it was so different to the Titanic, where there didn't seem to be any panicky movement, you know. No.
Everything happened as though normally.
Yes, yes.
Right. But of course this was wartime.
Exactly, yes. And so all I did was then, I was still intent taking this nurse on breakfast, was to collect my pat about her, right, and my piece of toast and roll, and make a pot of tea as quickly as because the pantry was empty by then, and I was just left alone, and go down to her. And by that time, you see, two sisters occupied each cabin had two.
Right.
Well, the sick one was still in bed, looking very white and frightened, and the other one was getting her things. And I said, "It's all right. I'll look after Sister So and So." And I said, "No, you must get up, and I'll dress you." And I could see she was trembling. She wouldn't be any good at all. So I decided to let her keep her pyjamas on, you see. And I said, "I'm going to put your uniform over your pyjamas, because you may have to climb down a ladder, and it'll be better for you." And it took me so long, and I made her take some of this tea and a bit of roll and that while I was dressing her. And finally, I said to this other, "Don't worry, I'll take her up the stairs when I've got her dressed." And when I took her up the stairs, the young officer, who was at the sort of door, you know, he nearly went white, because he said, "All the nurses have gone." So I said, "Well, I'd had to dress this nurse, and she was quite useless. She couldn't do a thing." So he said, "Well, I'll take her along, because they're all, more or less, the boat's ready to be lowered." And he said, "What about you?" So I said, "Oh, I've got, all sailors have a boat, you see, according to the Board of Trade." Right. So I said, "I'm number 4. I'll go along to my boat. I've got to go back to my cabin yet." So I went along and collected my engagement ring and my clock and different things, you know, and went up.
Excuse me, may I interrupt? At this time, was the boat listing at all?
No.
Was the ship listing, or there was no evidence that she was sinking?
No. Oh, well, there was a little, because when you looked out forward, you could see she was a little bit down.
Down at the head.
But no She was such a big ship too, you see.
Yeah.
They don't, it's extraordinary, but neither of the ships that I've been sinking on have...
and very few people can say that, by the way.
Specialising in sinking.
Yeah.
Have ever behaved badly, they've all been, gone down as ladies.
So you came up from your cabin with your rosary and your other belongings.
All my bits and pieces.
Right.
And, the thing was that I was so keen on not using any sense at all, putting a couple of rolls in one pocket, and my prayer book in the next, and then turning my apron up so that nothing would drop out of my pockets.
Right.
Going up, find a number 4 boat, and it was just about to be lowered, and there was a poor little frightened bellboy there that I tried to cheer up and tell him this was all right, it always ended all right, sort of thing, And it's awful on these new boats because if ever you're on a boat that has to be lowered, it's awful because when they're lowering boats, the ropes are all new. Terrible, because one end of the boat will go down and the other end stay up, We left the little bellboy halfway up the ship, you see. He got so panicky that he took the wrong rope, and it was a rope that was hanging over the side. And
with the knot, you stayed on the ship?
No, we got him to drop. We insisted that, let's go and fall into the boat, we'll catch you, sort of thing. But we got down, and next to me was standing a doctor. This is the Britannic.
Yeah.
And he was a very quiet chap, but I happened to have my back to the ship, looking at it.
Yeah.
And it was very crowded. And as we touched water, everybody jumped out.
Out of the boat?
Out of the boat, making a wonderful dive, just like you see fish, they come up. And standing next to us, I said, why are they doing that? I still had my back to the boat. And he didn't answer. And I looked at him, I thought, well, what's the matter with you, sort of thing. I still had my senses, I still had to look at the face. And of course, she was still going on, and she had 3 propellers, and they were cutting everybody to pieces. You see?
I see. She was already tipping out. The propellers were out of the water?
No, she was on an even keel.
Right.
She wasn't even...
I see.
That's the thing, she wasn't even...
the largest ship in the world at that time. And let us hear now what happened.
Well, I was left alone, you see, and I decided which would it be better to be, cut the pieces or drown. I mean, I had to make the decision. If I stayed in the boat, she was being drawn, you see. That it's wonderful how, even at a distance, that those 3 propellers could draw.
Right.
And I could feel her going over, and I thought, well, now,
which is it?
Drowning is not as bad as being cut to pieces. And doing it cold-bloodedly, too.
So you went over the side?
I went over the side.
Did you have a life jacket on?
I did something, John, that I always, if your mother, well, I don't suppose I took up a boat drill, but I was always very, very strict,
Strict with your passengers?
Oh, terribly.
Yeah.
Now, don't put on a life vest unless you know that you mustn't put it on over clothes. I mean, jackets and that.
Right.
Put it on as near to your body as possible.
Right.
And they used to, you're awfully strict on boat drill.
You had good reason to be.
Well, anyway, on this trip, I was hoping to see my brother, and for that reason I took all my best clothes. Although it was only your brother, you always like to be very smart.
Sure.
And I had this lovely coat. Well, instead of putting the coat over the lifebelt, I put the lifebelt over the coat. A thing I never allowed a passenger. I could kill the passenger if they did that. And so when I went into the water, I went down miles with the weight of, clothes, and came up under the boat. And to begin with, I got a terrible blow on the head, which you may think is the reason for me behaving as I am today, and it's going to give me some food and talking too much. But I got a terrific bang on the head.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it did occur to me, if I get another like that, I'll be finished.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not panicking, but just thought.
Registered in your mind.
Yes.
Right.
You keep.
Yeah.
I won't let go, so I let go. I met that man after. He was telling the story. Jack, how he panicked because he could feel this strong hand, and then I opened my hand and let go.
Yeah.
And he was a little red-haired, what do you call it, orderly.
Yeah.
In the orderly corps, because the
Medical.
orderly, you see. And he was telling his mate when I heard him say, and he said, a strong grip, and he said, then suddenly let go, and I said, that was me. And he looked at me, because he'd heard I'd been, you know, the water. And I thought to myself, what a grand thing that I let go, because he's a lovely little chap.
Yeah.
But what a terrible thing, you know, I'd been killed and dragged him.
Dragged him with you. But you came up all right after you let
Yes,
go.
I came up all right, and, you know, sort of floated. But the only thing, of course, that nearly absolutely killed me was the first thing that was quite near me when I turned round was an open human head.
Mm.
Just...
Somebody hit the propeller, probably.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, and the thing that, of course, it would come to your mind, it reminded me when my father used to kill a sheep, you know, and a sheep's head.
Yeah.
I never saw anything so dreadful.
Yeah.
And you could tell from the collar that he was a young and lovely person, you know,
Yeah.
a young, it was a soldier, whatever, you know, Red Cross man.
Mm-hmm.
But I floated about. I carried 4 life belts floating around. Because I don't swim, you see.
I know.
I've never learned to
Yeah.
swim. And so...
You swallowed a lot of water.
oh, talk about... For years afterwards, I could feel that cork.
Yeah.
You know, your mouth full of cork, and,
Yeah.
you know, if you're wretched, you brought up cork. And...
This was the cork insulation from the ship.
yes, from the ship, and you see the oil too.
Yeah.
But presently, I heard a noise, and a young man who was partly submerged called out, and he must have seen it. I didn't see it. Saw the life, one of our launchers come towards him, and he called out, "There's a woman in the water." And then I looked over to see him, and poor thing, our on board medical, not the ship's company, but the head, he was a man who was very much disliked, the head of this officer, and he was standing up in the boat, and this young fella called out, and he asked to be picked up. He said, "Wait your turn." And I think I hated that man from that moment. Well, I mean to say, fancy anybody. And he said, "I've lost my arm, sir." Well, he said, "Wait your turn." And he was standing up in his regimentals and quite all right. If I had a gun, I would have shot him.
Yeah.
Terrible.
I believe it.
And this poor chap went down.
He didn't survive.
No, he went down because he'd lost one arm.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's very difficult to try and swim with one arm, especially if you've not been...
Shock and loss of blood as well.
Yes, terrible. And
Frightful story.
and then I never forgot that poor human head that was, you know, and you could tell by his neck, young, very young, and his fair hair and that, and the whole thing was too awful.
Yeah.
And but afterwards, it went all round the ship. This 2 of the sailors said they'd never seen anybody in the water, practically, you know, near death, smiling. Well, I said, wouldn't you smile if somebody came to pick you out of the water after you'd been in that melange, you know?
Exactly. Sure. I'd have smiled too. It must have been at that, if you didn't realise it at the time, shortly thereafter, to think that you had survived the sinking of two great ships like that.
Yes, it did.
It's been quite a feeling of a special salvation that you must have experienced, that you had somehow been spared.
Well, it's been a little bit, John, I don't know how you feel about, religion now. It's always been a little bit of what shall I say, what's that right word? I can't find it. I know it's on the tip of my tongue, but...
you mean that you felt somehow special?
A certain responsibility for a certain thing. Something very difficult turned up to do. We said, oh, that's not my affair, that. Well, how do you know it's not your affair? Perhaps it's God's wish or something, you've been in such a thing. And you you feel you're drawn, and you can't say no, because all sorts of queer things have happened, and you feel, well, it's nothing to do with me. Well, how do you know it's nothing to do with you? Perhaps it is, something, and it's quite queer.
I think what's important, too, and this is my theory, and one of the things I propose to discuss in the book, that particularly on the Titanic, that those who had a job to do, like the two pantry boys with a sack full of sovereigns, or Andrews and the deck steward, for instance, I don't know, they were throwing over bundles of deck chairs over the side, or the gym instructor within the gym showing people how to work the bicycles, even as the ship was sinking, or the orchestra that was playing. All those people who had jobs to do and somehow felt more comforted doing something. In both cases, you, as a stewardess, in the first case on the Titanic, you comforted a woman passenger who was afraid to get into the lifeboat. You put your arm around her.
It made such a difference. She brightened up at once. She sort of put herself into my care.
Well, because that was your job, taking care of passengers.
I suppose it was,
And then you took care of the baby. And then you took care of the mess boy on the Britannic. Again, you felt at the time that what made you feel, I'm sure, more less afraid was that you got on with the job.
It was that, because I had the same experience when I was down nursing when I photographed taken, because just before the Britannic, I was down nursing in Broadstairs, where Prime Minister lives, and it was a lovely little hospital, but we were very short-staffed, and there was one boy there. He had about 18 wounds in his arm. His arm should have come off, but they tried to save it. And he suffered terribly. And 18 tubes had to go into his arm twice a day.
To drain it.
And, I knew matron detailed me to look after him. Well, I had to look after him day and night. He had to be dressed at night, which meant that I had to, because he was bad there and they were afraid of losing that arm, I had to get up every 2 hours. Well, when you're young and tired, it's an awful job.
Yes.
And that boy, although it must have been agony, he scarcely ever made a motion, because he'd asked, let nobody but Nurse Jessop, I can't stand the pain. He must have felt just the same pain with me as anybody else.
Sure.
You see, but he didn't say a word, but his face used to go completely white. And of course I used to feel it. I think those experiences, give you a sort of, they do help you.
They give you strength.
Yes, because when somebody else puts their confidence, you don't feel that you daren't fail them.
That's right. I think this was very much the case.
And he was a young teacher, and you could tell he loved his job, and he was always afraid he'd lose his arm, and the surgeon who was looking after it said, that arm may have to come off. And, we were working, trying to sort of do everything to save the arm, Because in the First World War it wasn't,
They didn't have as many tools.
No, and we were very short.
Yeah.
we were short of nurses, we were short many a time. I had to get up in the night to do him because nobody in the people we had would be able to do that dressing. I mean, it was really a professional nurse's job, and not not one of the the ADs.
Well, but the thing was that he liked and trusted you, and felt that you were the one. Of
course, it used to worry me because I used to feel terrible. Because I used to see his face going whiter and whiter, and I knew the pain.
Yeah.
And of course, I'd suffered a great deal of pain myself in my life, but I didn't want him to think that,
I want to ask you one more question, and then we'll have some lunch. Last week, when I spoke to Edith Russell, she said that after she had been on the Titanic, she used to go on other ships, that people knew who she was, or knew she had been a Titanic survivor.
Well, she jolly well see to it too, did she?
Well, not only that, but did you find when you were on the Majestic, for instance, or any of the later ships you were on, that people said,
"No,
here comes Jessop"?
Never once has anybody come to me. Isn't it funny? But you can keep such a lot of secrets to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think this. Well, nobody's mentioned it, but there's nobody in this village even, I think, that knows. You see...
Knows about you and the Titanic. But surely your fellow stewards in the 20s and 30s when you were on ships.
Yes, when I went to South America, because I went and rejoined the Royal Mail.
Yes.
Did I tell you that?
Yes, you told me about that.
Because I just wanted to see my own hometown again. Mm-hmm. And they never mentioned it. Mm.
Have you found being a survivor of the Titanic, has it in any way given you any kind of different life than you thought you might have had otherwise? No. It was, to your mind then, as you said earlier, just another incident in a life of 42 years.
As far as that's concerned, nobody has ever mentioned that I've been at sea or been on the Titanic or anything. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I think that a lot depends on the person themselves.
I think that's very true.
Mm-hmm. I've met a lot of people and I've made a lot of friends that even didn't know I'd been at sea.
Yeah.
Sometimes it would come out if I said that of all the countries I liked best, Japan was the one, and the country I didn't care for much, or depressed me, was India. You see, and I think it's just the atmosphere in a country.
Right. Well, I think this has been a most interesting, and certainly in terms of my book, absolutely invaluable discussion with you, and I certainly appreciate your time. Yes, because I didn't know any of these things that you told me about the Britannic, and I think also, as a general kind of portrait of a stewardess in those days, it's been a pretty good interview.
Well, the Britannic was it's a tremendous thing for me. It also, what shall I say? I don't know whether I ought to tell you this, but a great example of what human nature can be and how it can fail you. Now, you'd be surprised. I mean, the reason I was in that position on the Britannic was because I'd stayed behind to look after a passenger, you see.
Right.
Well, I didn't want anyone to sort of say, well, because it was my duty.
That was your job.
It was my job.
You would no more have not gone down to that passenger.
And another thing, you have a job, you've got to do it, and I always believe in finishing my job.
Right.
Well, she was of the nursing staff.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we had an old matron on board, and of course I belonged to the ship's company. She may have looked down her nose at that, I don't know. But when I was taken, we were first of all dragged out of the water, then taken by boat to a little island where the native woman was most kind.
Right.
And took my clothes and hung them outside, and I had to go out after some fish my quarters from behind the purser's back, standing talking to someone, and she was trying to dry them, you see, in the sun, one of the Aegean Islands, little tiny island, and they were so kind. She put me to bed and put a warm blanket over me while she tried to dry my clothes. And then we were taken by launch to the flagship. The flagship was the Duncan, and she was a beautiful, thing. And then we were taken ashore in the Piraeus to the hotel. Well, by this time, I was wanting to bring up the cork I had inside of me, and the salt water. And I was given a room, went to bed, and I got up, and I must tell you this little joke about the family. After the Titanic, I used to, moan that on the Carpathia that picked us up, I couldn't buy a toothbrush.
Right.
And I couldn't live without cleaning my teeth, you see. And the boys got a little bit, what brothers are. Now, Vi, the next time you go on a boat, for God's sake, if it's going to sink, put your toothbrush in your pocket. Well, no, don't laugh, John. When I went to my cabin after getting this milk, I was shown a room, no food now, nothing to drink, not even a cup of hot water. And I was full of
seawater
and powdered cork, which they love to put in ships. And I got up and I thought, well, I must get some of this cork from around my teeth. And I was standing cleaning my teeth. Still very empty, you see. I haven't had any the day before, because in those days, I told you, communion, you couldn't. And there was a knock at the door, and the sister matron opened it. She didn't say, "Oh, Miss Jessop, I'm so glad to see you're alive. Have you had anything?" She said, "Where did you get that?" Well, I was afraid of being sick, because I still felt
ill.
Yes, you see, there was still salt water. And I took a breath and I said, I brought it with me, quietly, for fear of... And, shut the door with a bang, went off. She never asked me, and matron never sent for me, never came near me. She was an old Boer woman. She was much too old to be there. But could you believe that sort of thing? Never saying, have you had anything?
Or are you all right? Or,
and the next thing, about 2 hours' time, a cup of terrible stuff came out. I don't know what it tasted like. And a bit of bread with some terrible goat's milk butter on it.
Rancid, sour
shocking stuff. And but I thought to myself, just imagine, I wonder if they'd been in the water and swallowed. I never forgot that. Where did you get that toothbrush?
Where did you get that?
And I said I brought it with me, which was the truth, but I was afraid of elaborating and saying that what a good thing it was I brought it with me.
You brought it with you because you hadn't had one on the Titanic and you couldn't buy one on the Carpathia.
And my brothers
always ragged you about.
They ragged me. For goodness sake, next time, the first thing you put in your pocket is your toothbrush.
Well, on that amusing anecdote, we'll end the interview and have some lunch. Thank you very much.